Hillary Clinton, in her own words, on the election. Stunning words from her. She's also refusing to accept blame for being on the wrong end of the biggest political upset in decades.
Hillary Clinton's account of what happened includes major media failures.
I don't think the press did their job.
And the way she presented in the book is a little bit like it was our job to get Hillary Clinton elected.
For months now, the leaders of North Korea and the United States have been goading each other in a war of words over the unthinkable, the possibility of a nuclear war. With each missile test, each nuclear test conducted by Pyongyang, Donald Trump has responded with aggressive rhetoric, usually delivered in 140 characters or fewer. The UN's General Assembly got a taste of that this past week when President Trump threatened to totally destroy North Korea if the U.S. is forced to defend itself or its allies. As the U.S. news media have learned, striking the right tone and not being alarmist over this kind of story presents its editorial challenges. Sandwiched between North Korean propaganda and the unpredictability of the Trump White House is South Korea, where the media are also trying to keep a level head. Although better informed and more cautious in tone, the newsmakers the South Korean media are covering are also struggling to make sense of what's coming out of Washington. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the distance between most of the global media and this particular news story, and how the further the media are from the Korean peninsula, the more imminent the prospect of nuclear war seems to be.
With stakes this high, tensions this real,
President Trump warning the regime today against making any more threats toward the U.S.
They will be met with fire and fury.
This is the kind of news story that doesn't need sensationalizing. But still, look at the coverage, and it's there.
Now the threat from North Korea reaches a whole new level.
The more we sort of talk about this, the more we raise the possibility of misperception and miscalculation. And even though both sides don't want a war, if you create all this sort of rhetorical noise in the background, you significantly raise the possibility that somebody might accidentally do something foolish. We're more likely to get into a war through miscalculation than through a calculated strike by the North Koreans.
Especially now, media coverage is probably more important than ever because we know that the President of the United States is an avid TV news consumer. So recently I watched MSNBC, and more than once they just repeated that Kim Jong-un is a madman.
The Chinese would allow a madman on their border.
You know, this man with nuclear weapons is a madman.
This is the art of the deal meeting Dr. Strangelove.
And that's not a very good analysis. He wants nuclear weapons for a particular strategic purpose. But if you were just watching that show, what you'd come away with is Kim Jong-un is crazy.
Is this a person who is rational enough?
And you have to worry that filters into decision makers generally, but specifically now where we know President Trump likes to consume cable news.
Sometimes news outlets aiming for brevity shorthand their way to inaccuracy and sensationalism.
As for the regime,
in July, the head of the CIA suggested Washington could be considering options to remove Kim Jong-un. Pyongyang replied, saying it would, quote, strike the US with a powerful nuclear hammer if the United States tried regime change. The shorthand version, in a headline in US magazine Newsweek, left out the second half of the North Korean statement.
I think there's a huge double standard when it comes to threats that are imposed by North Korea and U.S. threats, because, you know, North Korea is seen as the axis of evil, the communist state.
The rogue nation's latest missile launch.
The dictatorship.
Mysterious and secretive nation.
The irrational Kim Jong-un doing something unpredictable and dangerous.
Kim Jong-un is creating an almost godlike image for himself at home.
Whereas U.S. is seen within the paradigm of democracy and freedom and rationality.
But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
North Korea is one of the most isolated countries in the world. There are just 2 foreign news bureaus in Pyongyang of the news agencies AP and AFP. Foreign journalists are sometimes invited in to witness big events.
So we could still see a missile launch today as some sort of...
But getting access to North Korean sources is a significant challenge for reporters. That lack of access to what's really going on creates suspicion and ultimately feeds the rumor mill. That speculation turns into news stories, video game scenarios, and even film plots.
You want us to kill the leader of North Korea?
When rumors about their strange customs or something weird pops up online, it's easy to believe that they're true. And as a package, over time, you get the impression that these are people that are fundamentally irrational and strange and really have nothing to do with us. And that's a common feature in wars always, right? Your enemy is the other, very difficult to understand, barely human.
Maybe in some ways it makes it seem like a bit of a joke as well as kind of a threat.
Don't you have something better to do, like planting crops, than worrying about what styles of hair women and men should be allowed to do?
I think that this can contribute to a relationship where North Korea is very othered. It's seen as very otherworldly, and it may make some of the threats from the Western side seem more palatable.
And this dehumanization actually serves in the interests of North Korea's opponents and their military interests, because you have this very simplistic frame of good, logical, rational people versus crazy monsters.
Their leader doesn't care about them, and they're prepared to have millions of their citizens die.
And this actually hinders the outside world from understanding North Korea's very rational motivations in developing missiles and nuclear weapons.
North and South Korea have been in a standoff for more than 70 years. In South Korean media, the proximity to the conflict and access to some information from North Korean defectors has produced a different, more informed journalism.
안녕하십니까. 12시 뉴스입니다. 한동안 잠잠했던 북한이 오늘 또 동해상으로 탄도미사일을 발사했습니다.
The Donald Trump factor, however, has sent a jolt through the South Korean media landscape.
그런데 문제는 트럼프 대통령이 한미 FTA나 무기 거래 등을 거의 매번 언급하고 통화한 뒤에 일방적으로 발표한다는 점입니다.
On this US president and the possibility of American intervention in the region, conservative outlets, traditionally hawkish and pro-US, find themselves in the same camp as liberal outlets that favor diplomatic engagement and are often skeptical of US involvement. In mid-April, Chosun Il-bo published a newspaper headline articulating fears of Trump, quote, going rogue on North Korea. The increased tensions since the Trump presidency have also pushed political discourse in South Korea to the right, with conservative media outlets opening a debate that was considered closed a long time ago, the possibility of a nuclearized South Korea.
There's a lot of anxiety here about Donald Trump and the way he governs, which when you're talking about something like nuclear weapons, it really scares people a lot, including conservatives. And conservatives are somewhat inclined to support the president because they're sort of more hawkish on North Korea.
트럼프 대통령이 원래 트위터로는 본인이 하고 싶은 얘기 항상 해왔으니까요. 근데 사실 이게 어떻게 보면 굉장히 외교적으로 결례입니다.
But Trump is just so unpredictable and he's so erratic. And some of the things he said about South Korea have just been so sharp and so inappropriate, right? I mean, that didn't do anything except help convince South Koreans that the president is just sort of unhinged sometimes.
There is a crucial component to this story, a historical angle. In the 1950s, the US played a lead role in intervening against a North Korean invasion of the South. That war never actually ended. There's been an armistice in place since 1953. Some episodes of the US's role in the North-South conflict through the Cold War and since have been forgotten or lost in sensationalist coverage.
They want bilateral negotiations with the people that have never kept an agreement in their life.
And that also contributes to the narrative that North Korea is solely responsible for the escalating tensions and that each crisis is a new one.
I do think that there's a kind of historical myopia on media reporting on North Korea. The historical context is very important on North Korea, and partly that's because the North Korean government and military remember the history of the Korean War. By contrast, in America, of course, the Korean War is known as the Forgotten War. It came very quickly after the Second World War when there was just a lot of war fatigue, and so people weren't interested in it at the time, and there's not been that much study of it since then either.
Months of news coverage of the verbal to and fro between Washington and Pyongyang have done little to clarify or improve what we know of the so-called Hermit Kingdom. North Korea remains closed to most of the world. Much of the US media continue to push incomplete, sometimes caricatured representations of the country. And for the two leaders caught in a war of words, there has been little effort to tone down the tension or the rhetoric.